Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Vibin Higher Podcast. I'm your host, Trevor, and I'm being joined once again by Mimi Gurman of radcastorg. If you haven't heard our first interview that we did with Mimi, it was definitely a must listen for anybody that was interested in getting information about Fukushima and the resulting radiation fallout. So today we're going to kind of tackle that issue again. I think with a bigger focus on some of the misinformation and disinformation that's been coming out. So first of all, Mimi, I just wanted to thank you for sitting down with us again.
Oh, thanks for having me. I really appreciated getting the call this time around because there is so much disinformation going on. And, to be able to dissect it for your listeners so that we can all get on the same page with critical thinking, that's the kind of thing that can move us forward with where to go and what to do. Without the critical thinking piece, we're all lost.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, you and I have been in touch. There was an article that kind of hit close to home here. I mean, we all know that there's tons and tons of, like we said, misinformation and disinformation out there about Fukushima. But there was one, like I said, that hit a little bit close to home to me, which was a weekly sort of periodical that comes out here in the central coast of California. That on the cover of it looks sort of like, I mean, what would you say, like a woman running from Godzilla or something, some sort of retro image with the retro text that just kind of makes a joke out of the topic, and it says Fukushima freak out. And the interview that you and I had done before this actually served a great purpose to a lot of the people in my personal life that hadn't really had a lot of information about the topic, or had, from what little they've read, were feeling safe about the whole thing. They listened to our interview and were informed and wanted to learn more and research more and see what things that they could do to sort of safeguard themselves from some of the things that have been happening as a result of what happened at Fukushima. And I get an email from one of my friends who I had actually been talking about or on this subject the most, with a link to this article. And I have since sent you the article, but it's basically, like I said, makes a joke out of the topic and tells everybody, don't worry, everything's fine. There's nothing you need to worry about here. And I actually got the article right here, and it says, there's a quote here: "However, when it comes to human health here in the United States, I am confident in saying I don't think there will be any impacts," which is a pretty bold statement, considering the amount of radiation and everything happening over there in Japan.
Yeah, that quote was from Ken Buesler. And Ken Buesler is a scientist over in Massachusetts at the Woods Hole Lab. And the Woods Hole Lab, I have to state, is doing really great work. I think one of the main lab researchers there is a guy named Marco Caltafan. And he's a genius. He's wonderful. He tells the truth with his results, and I think he's a really trustworthy guy. Ken Buesler, however, is a whole other ball of wax to me, and what I've been trying to show people. And again, this comes back to critical thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have people out there who call themselves experts, and yeah, he supposedly, Ken, is an expert on plutonium or something to do with plutonium. I believe that. But what I also see, and I've seen repeatedly for the last 2 years with him, or at least year and a half, since he's making this new name for himself on the backs of Fukushima and all of those who have suffered and died from it, is that everything's going to be fine. But while he says everything's fine, he's out there trying to get your money, to fund research that he's doing, that he's already paid to do. He works at a laboratory that gets a lot of money. It's a very famous laboratory and for oceanic research. And he wants you to pay for his tests on our ocean. And I look at that, and to the tune of $600 or so a pop.
Oh, wow.
So the local the scam that he's doing right now, to me it's a scam, is he has you on the West Coast, us on the West Coast, send him, and we pay for this too, we send him water samples from the ocean, and he tests them. We pay $600 for him to test those samples. I found out that the tests themselves probably run about, I don't know, around 200 or $250. And I wonder what he's doing with the rest of that money and why we are paying for that in the first place.
Yeah,
So I guess my issue with Ken Buessler is that how can on one hand he be saying everything's fine? Oh, give me your money so we can test. It's because he knows things aren't fine. And this, for me, is one of the seediest, most like spurious ways of dealing with our vulnerability or using our vulnerability in order to cash in on it. And this is why I trust him not a bit, and I can't help but feel this way about him. So I really had to say that because, as you can probably hear in my voice, I get very frustrated when people use our vulnerability to get ahead. And it's not that we don't need the ocean tested, because we do. We need that more than anything. But the fact is the scientists and the governments are the ones who should be testing this and paying for this to be done, not us.
And I think it's a good litmus test, for information that you're being given from any source, really, is if they're asking for money for it.
Oh, definitely. It's like point one on critical thinking. Why do you want money from us when you have money? You are a lab. Governments use you and your labs. Why are you? Yeah. So one of the things that I also find difficult with Ken is that there are a lot of people downplaying the gravity of this event based on the data of these low levels that they're finding right now. If we're finding low levels of cesium, that's still cesium. You can't have a low level of cesium that you ingest and have it still be called a low level. It's dangerous. Any kind of ionizing radiation that we ingest or inhale can cause cancer. So, back to the low levels. Because scientists might be only finding these quote-unquote low levels right now of cesium or, in the beginning iodine, doesn't mean that these aren't going to become worse. And the thing that everybody needs to understand is that we have 3 loose corium. Those are the cores that melted through the containment. No one knows how to stop these loose cores from, going to wherever or deep into the ocean or wherever it is that they are. This is unstoppable. Mm-hmm. So this is going to continue and continue until we reach a tipping point. So to say that everything is fine, back to that, because all of these so-called experts will tell you this. This is why I keep bringing it up. To say that everything is fine is just not a true statement. It's conjecture. And it's dangerous. And it's dangerous to all of us who listen to them, who will then, for instance, go out and maybe eat seaweed because, the levels are low. Remember that there are no low levels of ionizing radiation. It's made up. This is a made-up concept and construct to confuse us and to have us think that those who are telling us that are experts and know what they're talking about, and they don't.
Yeah, I think that you said that in our first interview, that really there is no, and I mean it makes perfect sense, that there is no safe level of radiation.
Regarding low levels, so-called low levels of radiation, the Nuclear Information and Resource Service, which is called NIRS, we all use NIRS. It's a wonderful organization. Nuclear Information and Resource Service says there is no safe level of exposure and there is no dose of ionizing radiation so low that the risk of malignancy is 0.
Yeah, I mean, that does make perfect sense. And I think another thing you might be able to clarify is that once you have particles of radiation in your body, they never leave. Is that correct?
What we know is that when we inhale or ingest particles, those particles, no matter how tiny they are, continue to irritate tissue or bone or whatever it is inside that it attracts to. And different particles attract to different things. Different radionuclides attract to different things. For instance, strontium, which they are also finding right now, by the way, in seaweed. And this is a very hard thing to detect. And strontium is one of the things that we are requesting now that these scientists start looking for in their research in the ocean, because it's much easier to look for cesium, and we need to know about strontium. So anyway, if you ingest strontium, no matter how small a particle it is, one particle, remember, can give you cancer. What it does is for strontium, it will latch on and start irritating your bone. And it will eventually give you bone cancer. Cesium affects tissue and muscle. Your heart is a muscle. We will be seeing a lot of heart issues that come up, far more than we already do, which is even hard to imagine because we have so many heart issues now. But cesium will play a big part in that. Iodine 131 goes to your thyroid. And again, it just continues to irritate an area of the body until it gives you cancer. It pings it. I like to call it that. It's this constant pinging of this little area until you get a cancer from it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that you wanted to talk about, and I definitely did, the effect that articles like the one that we've been talking about are having on people that don't really have a lot of information about the topic. So, we talked about the cover of this periodical here where I'm at. It just looking at it, if someone were to see that and not really want to dig into the issue anymore, they can kind of use that as fodder to write off the entire subject. And look, the cover of this magazine here says that everything's fine. It basically is insinuating that anybody that is concerned about what's happening with Fukushima or the fallout is crazy. I mean, it says Fukushima freak out, whatever. And I think that like I said before, I think it's a travesty, especially once you get into the article, and people are going to be citing this article, at least in California where I'm at, for a long time, I think, unless they're able to hear something, along the lines of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I want to let folks know that the article that we're referring to is in the rag called The Independent, and you can see it on theindependent.com. And there, in the first paragraph, the writer, Ethan Stewart, talks about the panic starting sometime after New Year. It found its way to my inbox and my Twitter feed and took up residence on Facebook walls and dominated conversations with friends and colleagues. And he read reports titled, "Holy Fukushima, Radiation Already Killing North Americans." This is straight from his article.
Yeah.
And 28 signs that the West Coast is being absolutely fried with nuclear radiation from Fukushima and the worldwide nuclear crisis that no one is talking about. Well, can I just say that he chose to make a joke of this within the first 2 sentences. And this is not a joke. This is real. North America was hit within the first week of the Fukushima accident. And we have, I wrote an opinion, an op-ed piece to The Independent, countering this ridiculous article that Ethan Stewart wrote. And in it, I give you sources to look at, because every single thing that I say in it is sourced multiple times with truth. And he has none in his, just to let you know. So we were hit early on. At first, the radiation went to Russia within days, just days, 3 days. It was in Russia. And right after it hit Russia, it came to the west coast of the United States, and we started to see it. And I talk about this in the op-ed piece. And we saw it in seaweed. I'm not sure when the seaweed test happened. It's in my report, but very early on, the cesium. We had levels of iodine 131 immediately, which we knew we would. And we had cesium-134 and 137. These are all products of big nuclear accidents. This is what we look for. And then, so it hit the West Coast, then it traveled across the United States, and it was hanging out. It went into Europe. It spread over the Northern Hemisphere. And in 1 month, it crossed the line into the Southern Hemisphere. This accident sent radiation across the entire globe. And that is true. So for this guy to make like, holy Fukushima, radiation already killing North Americans. Well, guess what, buddy? It is. And the reason that we know that is that in Seattle, Arnie Gunderson from Fairwinds Education, he was a whistleblower in the nuclear industry. I did talk about that on our first interview with Trevor, but you can find him over at Fairwinds, and I recommend it. There's great info over there. But Arnie went to Seattle to test air filters to see what was in them, at random air filters, and he found high levels of plutonium, and in finding what he did find, he could determine, because those levels came in the air, those particles of plutonium came in the air, that, remember folks, we breathe air, that people in the Northwest ingested probably somewhere around 5 particles a day. So what that will do to us is eventually we'll start seeing, as those pings happen on our lungs from plutonium and in our bodies, we'll start seeing cancers from that. So while we didn't see instantaneous death, we will see death from this. And that's a fact. Again, these are facts. This is what happens when you ingest plutonium, 1 particle, you will get cancer. It's just what happens, let alone in Arnie's account 5 a day. So again, this stuff is real, and this article is a disgrace to make you think that your thoughts about this were in a panic mode, and that panic mode wasn't called for. Because if ever there was a time to panic, this would be that time. I'm not a fan of panic, Trevor. I mean, I'm not saying that because it doesn't do any good. But if you're going to throw the term panic out as if no one should ever do that, this is the time that we do that.
Yeah, and I was going to actually ask if you wanted to touch on some of the, you said that we might be seeing some lung cancers. Is that something that we should be looking forward to? Obviously not in a positive manner, but what are some of the signs or symptoms that we might be seeing along the West Coast, or maybe even farther east into the country as this continues on?
Well, when Helen Caldicott was here talking with us, and you can also go and check out what Helen says about all of this. I highly recommend Helen Caldicott's videos. You can look up her videos starting with the most current. Just, Google her and start with videos from 2014 and go backwards. There's one that I need to put up on Radcast as well. And there's also a new video that Arnie put out that's on Radcast on the front page. So you can check that out. And he talks about Fukushima for the 3rd anniversary and what's going on. But I'm sorry, Trevor, what was your question?
Well, I mean, what are some of the signs and symptoms, so to say, that we might be seeing along the West Coast and perhaps farther east or east into the country, as far as maybe cancers, or you said maybe heart disease?
Yeah. Well, we've already started to see increases in thyroid disease and thyroid cancers among children on the West Coast, from the bottom of California all the way into Vancouver, BC, because this is where the iodine-131 struck in the very beginning, and nobody was taking iodine pills to ward that off because our government didn't tell us. So kids are already getting those cancers now, so it's here. As far as the rate of heart attacks and heart cancers and things like that, heart disease, I don't know yet when those are going to surface. Each thing has its time frame, and Helen was telling us about those time frames. She said that within 5 to 7 years of the initial event, which was in 311, we will start to see a lot of leukemia, big clusters of leukemia, just, all over the place. So that is one of the things that's going to come first. And I think that detecting the rate of heart disease and death from heart attacks is going to be harder to discern because so many people are overweight and have diabetes and have all of these heart ailments anyway, that I think it will be, I just think it's going to be a little bit more difficult to shine through.
Yeah, well, have you heard about this Navy family who I think it was a sailor, and I actually think that there's quite a few of them that were aboard one of the ships that were providing relief almost immediately after the disaster took place. I think that there's one though that has brought a lawsuit against the U.S. government.
Yeah, the USS Reagan. They were rerouted right when Fukushima happened, and they got hit with the plume, and the plume rained down, not in rain, it looks like snow in the pictures. And they were basically bathing in this stuff. They were trying to clean the ship in it, and there are so many sailors who are sick and dying right now. There's one, they're suing TEPCO. I'm not sure. I just was put in touch with Charles Bonner, who was the lawyer for the sailors, to find out more details on that. But you can find out more details by going to the Nuclear Hot Seat and looking for the USS Ronald Reagan stories. There's 2 of them with Charles Bonner.
Okay.
But the point there is that the United States government sent our sailors into a nuclear plume, knowing it was a nuclear plume. Our government knew this, and is going to be causing the death of many of our military people. One of the guys eventually had a kid right after this happened. He went home, and their child was born with 2, I think, a brain tumor and cancer.
Wow.
And what we know about radiation, and this is really important for those who are listening, this is one of the most important points. Radiation will get to your DNA. And once that happens and your DNA is altered, there's no going back. If you decide to have a kid, their DNA is now altered. You are passing along altered DNA. It's no longer as healthy as it was when you were born, And whether your child sees it or not, as a result in their being, it's still within them, and it will get passed on. And at some point, sooner than later, it will show itself as, a sickness, a cancer. So we'll be seeing a lot of babies born with a lot of sicknesses and deformities. And this is what we see in Japan. This is exactly what we see in Chernobyl. By the tens of thousands, there are so many babies in Chernobyl who were born. They're no longer babies. These are young people who don't have, hands or legs or limbs or whatever, and when others were born with cancers and died. This is what we're doing to ourselves and our planet. If there is DNA, and I'm talking about plant life, animals, people, we are destroying the structure of our DNA. Do you know what that means? When you think about the future, you can start thinking about zombies. I'm being, tongue-in-cheek, but really, Again, if there was a time to think about zombies, it would be that.
Well, in terms of, maybe getting a comparison going, how does what happened in Fukushima relate to Chernobyl? I mean, was there more nuclear material released at Chernobyl?
Fukushima's 4 times worse than Chernobyl.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that...
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it will continue to become even worse than that because we have 3 loose corium.
And it's still continuing to leak. Yeah, I think
there's no stopping it. There is no way to stop this. Well, there's no valve. There's nothing.
And it's going directly unfiltered into the ocean, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we spoke about this last time, but there's a lot of numbers floating around the internet about exactly how much radioactive water. It's radioactive water, right?
It is, and the reason that it's radioactive is that there's a multiple different ways of the radioactivity to go into the ocean at this point. So you have the cores that broke through the containment. There is plutonium on the floors of buildings 1, 2, and 3. Like it's out. It's like on the floor. You have hills behind Fukushima. And when it rains, this is above ground water. When it rains and the waters come down the hill, they wash through the plant and go, everything was flooded there, and everything is cracked, and there's nothing working properly. So you have that water that comes through, hits plutonium, and goes into the sea. You also have groundwater, which is now affected by the loose corium. Okay, Fukushima sits on sand, and right below the sand is groundwater, and below that is the ocean. Okay, we're not talking about layers and layers and layers of concrete, which then go to, solid ground. This was built on the ocean. So you have the groundwater that is now contaminated and in Tokyo. You have the well system. So that water travels down and, it is in Tokyo now. So you have that. Then you have the cooling waters that they push into the fuel pools, which then goes out. It's like a in and out thing going right back into the ocean. Then you have, sorry, I'm not done yet. Then you have the tanks that they created to contain the excess water. They were trying to capture it and contain it. Well, first of all, you have to remember that you're trying to contain extremely radioactive water. When you think of radioactive, you have to remember this is hot. That's what it means. And so they have these tanks, a tank farm that they built, and we talked about this in Trevor's first interview with me, where the tanks were basically one sheet of metal, and instead of welding them together, they bolted them. Well, can you guys just think for a second of metal that's bolted that has water in it? You can just imagine how much of that water is going to seep through the non-welds, where the metal hits the metal and is supposed to have a seal. There's no seal. So those bolts have rotted and are popping. They're finding bolts. They've been finding bolts for 2 years, on the ground from these tanks. So we have the waters from that are seeping out or flooding out of those tanks going into the ocean. So I think that's 4 or 5 different ways that the radioactivity goes into the ocean. And then there's Ken Buessler saying everything's fine. Yeah. But give me your money so I can test it anyway.
Well, let's talk about TEPCO for a second, because the article that we were talking about, and I think at this point it's also important to note that while we are talking about this specific article a lot during this interview, there's no shortage of these types of articles available online. I pulled up 4 or 5 in the 10 minutes before you and I started talking. But the one that we've been talking about sort of hails this, and I quote, gargantuan efforts by TEPCO, which for those who don't know is the Tokyo Electric Power Company, who I think is sort of in charge of, or was in charge of the nuclear...
They are in charge. They are in charge. It's private.
So what efforts are they actually making? Is there more of an effort that they can make? What's happening over there?
Well, what's happening and what's been happening for a long time is, in the beginning, the people who were working there were people who should have been working there. People who had studied in the field of, nuclear waste or nuclear power. But those people were dosed at such high levels so quickly that none of them could continue to work there, because you're only allowed a certain amount of radioactivity in your body per year. They were receiving that in the first week or months or whatever. So they ran out of workers very early on. And about 2 years ago, maybe less, maybe it was closer to a year or so ago, in the New York Times, and this was the first New York Times article, there was an article about the Yakuza who work with TEPCO, and the Yakuza is the Japanese mafia. And in Japan, the Yakuza's the Yakuza controls nuclear. That's where they get most of their money. Here, it was drug money. It was whatever kind of money our mafia gets theirs from. Well, it's from nuclear. So the Yakuza said, because they need their money to roll in, they can't have these efforts, these so-called efforts at cleanup, to stop, because they want money coming in to continue the effort to stop to continue to clean up. It's this bad circle. So what they did was they went out on the streets, and they sent people out on the streets to get people who are sick and dying on the streets to come and clean up. Remember, again, this is the most radioactive stuff that we're dealing with here. They had people with HIV/AIDS coming in to get some money, so they'd come and mop up radioactive waters on the ground that were leaking out of those tanks I mentioned earlier. Because who cared if those people died? All they wanted to do was make it seem like they're still trying to do something,
Uh-huh.
And they got people who were mentally incapable of doing these kinds of things. They took everybody at the lowest, denomination of healthy and well-being, to come in there and take care of this mess, because they didn't care if they died.
Well,
They've run out of people. That's who's running the show now. That's what's happening there. All the people who are there now, the people who are removing rods, fuel rods, these are people who are not educated in the field of nuclear science whatsoever. I'm telling you, these people are homeless. And they're picked off the streets because the others had too much radiation in their bodies and had to leave.
Well, that's lovely. I think CNN had an article today. I think that the residents of Fukushima were recently allowed to move back in. Have you heard that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they told them, come on back in. In fact, there's another article that came out yesterday where one of the, I don't know, restaurants, I guess, they're trying to promote the well-being of the Fukushima fishermen. So they want to push sushi on these people coming back into, radiated areas. They're all going to die. So they're pushing, there's a picture of somebody passing off the sushi bowl, It's totally irradiated fish. They're like, eat this, it will support the fishermen. So they know that they're eating radiated rice. We've had reports from people in Japan who say they don't know what to do because they know that they're eating food that's going to kill them. And that's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. And so when we talk about death on the West Coast here, yeah, that's coming, with children. It's probably, begun. But over there, not only has it happened, it's so bad. And we're watching people basically walk into a gas chamber. It's just different.
Mm-hmm. And I think we all know that you're not exactly going to drop dead immediately from radiation poisoning. It's sort of a creeping death.
It depends. It depends on the level. If you are receiving, over 1 microsievert for hours at a time, you're going to die pretty darn fast.
Really?
Oh yeah, you can't continue to live with that.
Now, what is the impact that the water that Tokyo's getting? I think you said now it's coming into their reservoirs or something. What's going to be the impact there?
And we're going to see the same thing. We're going to, all of Tokyo should have been evacuated from the start.
Really?
Oh yeah, the entire coast should have been evacuated, and that's no joke. But Japan, a lot of people say that due to cultural reasons, they couldn't go that way and evacuate people, and that they're too proud a people to do that. I don't think it had anything to do with that. I think it had everything to do, I mean, it might have, but I think it had everything to do with pretending that they had a handle on it, and just, the hubris that men tend to have. And some women, I see it now in our government with, a lot of the women in our government too, thinking that they can fix something that they don't understand. And in the meantime, let's not tell the world that this is so bad. Let's pretend, or let's just, we know how bad it is, but let's not tell anyone else. I think all of that happened. And I'm serious when I say, I'm not the only one who says this. All of Tokyo, all of that coast should have been evacuated when this happened. And if things were found to be okay, within a very short amount of time, of course, those people could have gone back. But it's not okay.
Well, I wanted to get into something that we touched on last time, was this secrecy bill that was passed, I think, in December of last year, so only a few months ago. Can we get into that a little bit deeper?
There's not all that, there's not a lot of depth to get into. They basically, just tried to shut the door on it.
So it's basically banning people from speaking about what, the radiation?
They are supposedly, people in the know, and I say that in quotes. So we have doctors, scientists, professors, teachers, people like government officials, all right? All of them any of them will get arrested if they put the truth out to us outside of the area. So it's a pretty big thing. They actually tried to arrest, or they did arrest, one of the mothers for protesting this, and she was a really big thorn in their side. And the backlash from the world that came in made them stop. They made them release her and, not do that. But the law of secrecy is still there. We still hear, we still get our reports. I know that Tokyo is affected and infected and contaminated by radiation and plutonium droppings, because we've seen photos from our friends over there who show us pictures of the black dust and their meters. They'll take videos with their Geiger counters. And black dust, you guys can look up black dust. It's pretty fascinating and super scary. And that's, it is from I think it's zirconium. I think I'm saying that correctly. I just saw it written out a different way the other day, and I like to be exact. But anyway, zirconium alloy or something. It's the covering on the outside of the fuel rods. And it's really, really radioactive. When the fuel rods exploded and went way up in the air and then came back down again, people started finding this stuff that looks like black dust in Tokyo. Well, all over the place, but there's a lot of it in Tokyo. And we still see pictures and videos come in today of the black dust and how radioactive it is. And I'm talking, this stuff is like off the Geiger counter chart. And that's in Tokyo. Wow. This is stuff where kids play, okay? It's on the streets, it's in a sound, it's wherever it fell. And when the winds blow, it picks it up and it blows it through the air. So people breathe this in, not knowing, because you can't feel it, and then it settles somewhere else. So no matter what kind of secrecy they think they have, I think the power of humans knowing that they have to get the word out, the same way that the Jews had to get the word out somehow and had runners to get the word out with what was happening during the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. The Japanese are doing the same thing now, and this is their Holocaust. This is so much worse than, to me, than, in how I see what's happened, and to the extent of the radioactivity that was released and is still being, is loose now, than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Well, there is protests going on in Japan and stuff, right?
Yep. They didn't ban protests.
So they're a little bit ahead of us over there in that respect.
Yeah, and those were all led by the mothers.
Okay.
Yeah, which I found extraordinary and not surprising. They said, we're not going to tolerate this. And it's the mothers who also go, not exclusively, but primarily, into the meetings that they can get into when, their politicians are talking about TEPCO, or TEPCO is talking to the people. And you will always see the mothers shouting at them because they know they're getting lied to and they know their kids are dying.
Well, good, good. I one thing that I did want to do is to sort of put to bed this notion that there's this naturally occurring radiation or ambient radiation that we get all of the time and that we've always gotten, and what's happening at Fukushima is no worse than that. Because that's one of the things that I hear a lot, and I think that it's inherent just in the idea that we've had a huge, massive, nuclear release into nature. That there's obviously going to be more radiation in that than this ambient radiation.
Ambient radiation is ambient radiation. It's like saying that the sun is the sun. It puts out what it puts out. Our geology puts out what it puts out. Ionizing radiation is not ambient radiation. Ionizing radiation is ionizing radiation. That's why we call it that. And it is made from nuclear power. And when nuclear plants explode, we receive that. And it is 100% different from ambient radiation. There's many kinds of radiation, but there's two different types. And one falls in this bucket and one falls in that bucket. And in this bucket, there are different varieties, and in this bucket, there are different varieties. But they don't intermingle, so to speak, So ionizing radiation can cause cancer. If you lay in the sun and the hole in the ozone is really big, yeah, you can still get skin cancer for sure. So it's not to say that ambient radiation won't give you cancer, because of course it can. Radon can give you cancer. They're looking into that right now in Salem, in Oregon, for why this particular high school has all of these bone cancer clusters. And they were thinking that it had to do with radon, just because we live in a high radon area. It's what our rock is here. It's what it puts off, our geology. But they're not the same. And when we talk about this stuff, and we talk about cesium and plutonium and, iodine-131 and strontium-90 and all the different types of plutonium and uranium and all of this, thorium, we could keep going. These are from nuclear power plants. This stuff will kill you.
Mm-hmm. So how far, we know, and you've even said that the radiation, the effect was felt globally, but as far as the United States, I think that there's an idea, even among the people who are concerned about it, that it might just be a West Coast thing. How far east are we really looking at issues right now?
We see, this is where things get, where if we had place markers, it would be really cool, that this piece of radiation is from Fukushima. What we see when we look at radiation readings across the United States, for example, from the west to the east, is we see pockets that come through where, if I was watching Fukushima and watching the webcam, and I knew that there was a lot of steam all of a sudden coming out of Building 3, that wasn't there before, I know, because that steam is going up into the air, that I'm going to go look at my wind map. I have a lot of different wind maps. And I'm going to look at the wind maps to find out how quickly the wind is coming this way and where it's going. What's the pattern? And if it's coming my way, I'm going to start to have my Geiger counter out all the time and see when those readings go up. It's like clockwork. We do see this. And if I see it, then I want to know, again, following the wind map or the rain, and precipitation, I want to know where that's going next, right? So if it's going, we have some readers in Montana. And we're all going to let each other know that this is coming their way. And we know what the Geiger counter is saying today, and what's it going to say in 5 days? And if it goes up, so that we can see, wow, okay, we're now 5%, 10%, 20% above our normal background levels that we've been at for a long time. We know that that's from Fukushima, and that's what we look at all the way across the states. And we do see that more when it's snowing or raining across the U.S. We can tell that. But, in all honesty, we have so much radiation that's held in the jet stream from so long ago, from our bomb testing. Because you have to remember that plutonium, for instance, has a half-life of like 250,000 years. So that stuff just sits up there. Some of it comes down, but, So whether it's from Fukushima or bomb testing or something else, like I said, we don't have a marker for it. And so I don't concern myself as much with what's happening in the air from Fukushima specifically as I do what's happening in the air regarding radiation in general.
Okay.
It's really important to understand and remember that we've got nuclear plants that are all leaking here, and places like Hanford that are doing what they do. And it's a mess here. It's a true mess. So people are getting radiated in the United States from our own nuclear plants, and that goes across the board to any country that has nuclear plants. And so you can't concern yourself all the time with, is this Fukushima or not? But what you can concern yourself regarding Fuk is what's happening with the food from the ocean? What are we doing with that? What are we doing with the imported food from Japan, the rice, the tea, the whatever, not to mention the fish, of course.
And you said...
Who's getting that and who's monitoring that? And the answer is no one.
So I think that it's safe to say, and we did obviously touch on this the last time, that really nobody should be eating anything out of the Pacific, correct?
That would be my recommendation.
Well, I kind of wanted to give you the floor. I know that you're working on this op-ed as a sort of counter to the article that we've been talking about specifically, but I think just in general to a lot of the disinformation out there. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on specifically as far as things that are being put out there?
Well, it all comes back to the big question is, so, okay, we're getting more radiation now than we have in a long, long time. So what do we do? And it's a really good question. What do we do? And the first step in what do we do is, we know that panic doesn't do anything. So don't panic. Or try not to. But again, there's reason to. We can demand, and we're actually getting somewhere with this, we can demand that the EPA turns on all of their monitors and provides readings for us in a way that is understandable. We can all call the EPA, for instance. There's an EPA. Every state has its own little, faction. If you just go to the main EPA site and tell them, we want our air monitored, we want our water monitored, and we can call senators and Congress and all of that. To what extent? I don't really think that's going to do a whole lot of good, but I'm not going to tell you not to do it. That's just me. I have my own way of being an activist, and we all have our own way. I think that having a Geiger counter is the best way to deal with the situation. And if you have a Geiger counter, you can at least know what's going on in your life. And that's what's key. That's what's important. And if you have kids, what's going on with them? Are you going to let them play in the rain? Doing a rain swipe is really easy to do. And finding out if there's something coming down in the rain that you don't want your kids playing in, because their little cells in their little bodies are multiplying so quickly that if one of them gets damaged from something that's potentially cancer causing, it can really affect them a hell of a lot quicker than it can affect you. So, you arm yourself with what's important. And here, Geiger counters are how I think we need to arm ourselves. So I think that's what I really want people to understand. And critical thinking. Remember these things when you are listening to somebody who calls himself an expert. I'm not an expert. I just pay attention, okay? And I need everybody to know that. I'm not an expert in any of this. I do massage therapy for a living, and I was a teacher in elementary and middle school. And I just pay attention and learn and listen to what people are saying. And sometimes, like in the case of people like Ken Buesler, it just doesn't make any sense. So you have to stop and say, you know what, I'm not going to believe this. So I wish you all well, and live well, find happiness, because I don't know how much of a future we're going to have. So take what we have now and pretend, if you have to, that maybe the end, maybe, the next phase of life is going to be way different from what it seems like now. So live it well now. Enjoy yourself.
Good advice, definitely. I wanted to ask though, how much money do you think somebody's going to need to spend in order to get a good, what you would consider to be reliable Geiger counter?
Reliable ones start at $550.
Okay.
And
But
they go to like 600. So anywhere between 550 and 600.
okay, and you did say before too, which makes a lot of sense, that get together with some people in your community or even some of your close friends and see if you can't pull together some money to get one of them.
Yeah, that's what we did. And so we share a Geiger counter here, and I know other people who have their own. But community sharing is a great way to do it. It makes the purchase a lot easier, and you can all communicate with each other and learn a lot more than doing it by yourself. So it's a great way to spread the word and knowledge and take care of each other like neighbors should. We've got information on radcast.org about Geiger counters. There's a couple different meters we have discounts for. So you can get in touch if you want to, but they're out there, and just do yourself a favor and get a good one. Don't think that those cheap ones are good, because they're not.
Yeah,
Okay, just a heads
absolutely.
up there.
And it's good, you're able to look at it with your own eyes, and you're not having to trust any sort of middleman. Although I think we've established and already well know that radcast.org, which is the website, is a fantastic resource, not only for radiation readings, excuse me, but resources in general. I know that you guys have a nutrition section. Obviously, like you've just said, that you guys have recommendations for Geiger counters. So, just kind of as a closing, how can people get involved with what you're doing at Radcast? How can they support what you're doing?
Well, as far as support goes, we need donations. So that would be incredibly supportive. And just to let folks know regarding that, none of us get paid. It's all volunteer. So the money goes to getting more software that we need, more space on the cloud, stuff like that. But as far as what you can do with us, you can contribute your readings to our map. And what that does is it enables anyone in the world who comes into Radcast to see what the radiation is at your house, in your little part of the world. And all of these little parts of the world, if we can see that, will alleviate Trevor having to ask questions like, well, what is happening with the rest of the United States? Because we'd be able to see it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you contribute your readings to Radcast, other people see that, other people gain the same awareness and information that you have, and it's useful no matter where people are. People in India, okay, might want to see what's going on in California, especially in California, because most people hear about California. They don't hear about our little podunk Portland, Oregon, and you'd be giving them that information. If you find things like lab results that are interesting to you regarding food readings or whatever it is, send them to me. I will post them, so other people can see it. That's what Radcast is for. It's for extending the knowledge base out to everybody, so you don't have to trust, people who you just don't know. And I won't post just anything. The nutrition page is kind of thin because I don't post, do this, do that, do this, do that, because I don't know how effective that might be.
Mm-hmm.
What is on there is effective. So we try to leave it like that, But I encourage you to send me things that you want to see on there. And rather than just tell me what to put on there, send me stuff to put up, and I'll do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, I highly suggest anyone out there that's even remotely interested or even a tiny bit concerned, check out radcast.org. I found that that is probably the best resource out there right now. So, Mimi, unless you really have anything else that you wanted to get out there to everybody, I think that we've covered pretty much everything that we wanted to.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank your listeners. This is it's a heavy subject. It's a downer subject. And um, I think that there are ways of getting uplifted by knowledge, so that you can explain these things to people. And I'm appreciative and humbled by your listenership.
Yeah, well, it's so cheesy and cliche, but knowledge is power, and we're not able to change anything or safeguard ourselves or do anything about in this situation without having, the knowledge about what's going on and what we do need to protect ourselves from. So it has been, and the interview that we've done with you has by far, I think, been our most popular and our most listened to. So it's definitely people are hungry for the information, and I think that's a good sign.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Trevor, for what you do.
And thank you, Mimi, and I think we'll probably be talking soon.
Okay, good.